All right. I'm now joined by Lillian Cicerchia from the What's Left of Philosophy podcast. How are you doing, Lillian?
I'm good, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I was just kind of hoping to pick your brain briefly about the the landscape that we seem to be looking at after the Supreme Court decision, and what kind of movement that you think it would take to sort of secure abortion rights in this world where the sort of big legal bulwark to protect it is going away.
Yeah, so I'll just say what I think that the world that's coming is. I mean, it's more or less in
Yeah.
some ways the world that's already exists, just made worse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, and then I'll answer your question about the movement part. What's coming is a world that's basically geographically segregated in terms of access to reproductive health care services, and it's already like that. So there are many blue states that have made, like New York, that have made abortion access, or the right to an abortion, not access, but the right to an abortion, a part of its state mandate. So it's
Mm.
constitutionally provided for in New York. That's not going to be true in any number, normally red states, where that have sort of wheedled down abortion access to the point where it's illegal, or it is legal in a very circumscribed and time limited, time sensitive way.
Mm.
And there are all kinds of trigger laws that, once this decision is made, will be handed down, and then abortion will become illegal, or simply inaccessible, in those states. So the way in which it will be criminalized will vary by state, but the point is that, there are a lot of places in which people will not be able to get abortions, and you're going to have a geographically segregated world of reproductive health care services in which people have to travel really long distances. Many already do. So like if you live in South Dakota right now, there's one abortion clinic in that state, one Planned Parenthood, and you're already driving for hours and hours to get these services. That's just going to become worse.
Mm.
So I think I would stress the continuity with the present, and acknowledge that it will be worse. And the reason it's worth stressing the continuity with the present is that there's a lot of like hysteria about what this will be like. And I
Mm.
think it's going to be an exacerbated version of what already exists, because it's been so bad for so long. And we
Mm-hmm.
talk about this like it's just a part of our regular culture wars, but things have been deteriorating for so long that, for a lot of people, the post-Roe world is the status.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, you have states where it's almost impossible now, and it will become completely impossible. So okay, so harder question. What can we do about it?
Well, I have kind of a particular perspective. I think the only way to win abortion rights
Mm.
is, a healthcare campaign that is unapologetically in defense of abortion rights. I think there are different ways of articulating that defense, but I think that, a campaign for universal health care is really one of the only ways that is going to go over and against this kind of state by state morass of a battle with Republicans. Um, the other important reason for that strategy is that the Hyde Amendment is the amendment that has restricted public funding for abortions unless states approve it, at the federal level. So in many red states, um, people cannot get access for abortions through federal money, and then not through state money unless the state voluntarily does so. That's what I mean. And this, restriction on abortion rights has been going on since the 70s. That was the first kind of compromise bill that was passed with the right after abortion became legal after Roe. And this, has really created a class segregated reproductive health care system, from the beginning. And the only way to lift those restrictions is to have a program that is universal in character at the federal level. State by state healthcare schemes are not going to fix this problem. They're most likely to pass in the blue states in which they already exist. So that's like as a matter of policy. I think that, and I also would suggest, I mean, this is kind of a more aspirational thing to say, but I think a reproductive health care bill of rights, like within, is a way of articulating how to package abortion health care into a universal healthcare system would be a great idea.
What else would be in there?
Provisions against forced sterilization and any kind of compulsions that or pressures that patients have Bill of Rights in general. So a healthcare Bill of Rights should be consistent, or a reproductive healthcare Bill of Rights should be consistent with the kind of thing healthcare providers should already be doing. But there's a lot of history of abuse in the United States, or just ways in which people feel coerced because of poverty into making decisions, which doesn't mean their decisions should be taken away. But people should be provided with the full range of options. And in the US, we have this healthcare system where you just go in and they give you drugs or birth control or whatever to try to solve your problem. And they don't really take the time to give you the full range of options of the kind of care you need, what your goals are, what your plans are, what your background is. And, I live in Germany now. When I go to the OBGYN, I get this like extremely, not necessarily sensitive, Germans are a little like, now I wouldn't call it great bedside manner, but very thorough exams all the time and giving you pamphlets and helping you, making sure you know what you're doing. And that's not really the way people experience healthcare in the US, and it's certainly not the way they experience reproductive healthcare. So changes in the qualitative nature of the care also need to happen in order to secure people's rights. The second thing is that this can't just be an electoral strategy. There's a debate on the socialist left about the extent and desirability of elections. I think that this is one area in which it is just clear that elections are an insufficient way of addressing the problem. There has to be a movement of healthcare workers, of independent feminist organizations, for example, that can put pressure on nonprofits and more progressive Democrats to enact legislation. It is not possible to address this problem with election campaigning on its own.
Yeah. So, last question, I guess. So, in terms of that, you said electoral politics is insufficient. You need a movement. I guess you kind of said this a little bit, but what kind of, what's the kind of movement that you think would actually be able to build the kind of like broad-based, majority support that you'd need to actually accomplish this stuff, right? There's this sort of like, good ambitious goals that you're talking about, sort of, much more general framework for reproductive freedom within universal healthcare and all of that.
Well, I think there's a combination of tactics, and it's just going to depend on the area. Some people see what's going on in Latin America, and they see the kind of mass women's demonstrations there for abortion rights as being like one thing to look at. People have public assemblies where they can kind of, get organized independently of mainstream institutions that have kind of run this into the ground. I think that's one, I don't know how successful that will be in the US, but given the number of people that come out to demonstrate for this thing, I think it's worthwhile to see if something more grassroots can put together committees that are willing to work on a healthcare campaign. I also think that doing more direct action things like defending clinics is important. I think that people who live in blue states should explicitly and patiently reach out to people who are kind of under siege in red states and do so with more than just donations. It might be possible to coordinate cross-state action for both providing direct services and maybe to do actual demonstrations. I wonder, I think this is kind of I think in a way, it's a civil rights issue. And
Mm,
I've always wondered if it would be possible to organize, with the consent and collaboration with people in the South, freedom rides, to be
mhm,
able to defend clinics and to bring resources and to kind of like voice verbal support at important, uh, for important demonstrations at Capitol buildings or occupations or whatever. But something beyond simply getting people to vote is
mm,
deeply necessary. And I think there are a number of tactics that you don't just have to like pull out of your hat. Like we have a history of social movements that have used tactics like this, and women even in the 80s and 90s have there's some writing and experience people have with defending clinics and doing escorting and kind of running underground operations to get people to point A to point B, and putting enough pressure on the medical system to like they did it once, and I think we can do it again, but it has to be on a better basis. Like it has to be on the basis of healthcare and positive rights, and not just negative liberties like the freedom to choose to have an abortion in the privacy of the decision with your doctor. It has to be something that our society actually supports in like a well-rounded idea of what it means to get healthcare. And that's really the problem with Roe, is that it was on a very narrow basis that it was legalized, and all of the problems of class and racial segregation that happened in terms of access to it were entirely predictable based on the kind of compromises that
mm,
occurred as a result of that narrow basis. So the job of the left is, I think, to be ecumenical in the tactics, but open-minded, and try to do something that launches an offense for something good, as opposed to only electing Democrats and insisting on only doing something to protect, like basically being on it, having a defensive strategy to basically fight off the right in the courts, and then elect Democrats who are willing to fight off the rights in the court and the right in the courts. Like that's not that hasn't it hasn't worked. It's not going to work any better in the future, and Democrats are increasingly unwilling to do that anyway. So there has to be a new argument that
mhm.
goes on.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of fighting for something good, I mean, I think I don't know how to say this in a slogan that's pithy, but I mean, like, I think that I mean, also in terms of contrast between the U.S. and Germany, I mean, like, if there's a good way to sort of present, that kind of unapologetic defense of reproductive rights in combination with, you know, support for state daycare and financial support, for young parents and all that stuff, as a way of sort of laying out the sort of overall vision of what we would think counts as a meaningful choice, right? That you don't have any financial pressure one way or the other. That there's no, that there's a system of universal health care that will pay for an abortion if you want to get an abortion. There's a system that will help you out if you want to have a kid. That like either way, that's you know that it's taken into that sphere of a like broader sort of more socialist conception of rights.
Well, so I agree with you. I'm just going to clarify, because I know if a German feminist watches this, she's going to call me on it immediately.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not some of that's not exactly true in Germany,
Mm,
but I want to say why, and then make a bigger point about how people
mhm,
should think more, like you're saying, institutionally about the problem.
mhm,
About having, as reproductive justice theorists in the US call it, a right to have children in a safe and healthy environment, as much as the right to not have children. And we want to have institutions that allow people and families, if they choose to have them, to flourish. And maybe a kind of plurality of family forms. I think that's what socialists want. And so in Germany, it's actually the state won't pay for you to get an abortion, and it's only legal up until 12 weeks. And you have to be referred to an abortion provider kind of through a counseling service. So you can't directly access abortion healthcare yourself. It's a part of the compromise made with the Christian Democrats, I think in the 70s. And
mm,
so there's a lot of restrictions that actually created a stable equilibrium. On the one hand, there's no insane right wing challenging abortion rights in the same way because this compromise was reached. On the other hand, I think if you talk to like German feminists, they will tell you that there's a lot of problems. The right contrast, the place with the most expansive abortion rights policies in Europe is the Netherlands. And they also, not that this matters to me morally, to be clear, they also have the lowest rate of abortions per capita in Europe. And the reason I say that doesn't matter to me is I think there should be as many abortions as women who want them. But it does show that like the having well-rounded sexual education, an abundance of social services, and unrestricted access to an abortion, the combination of those things does in fact decrease the likelihood that people are coerced to make any undesirable sexual choices with their sexual freedoms and reproductive freedoms. So I think that like as an institutional infrastructure, it's places like France and Germany and Italy and Spain are not actually the model. I think there's even more egalitarian setups.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much, Lillian.
Thanks, Van. I appreciate it.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.